Hello, and welcome to the only podcast where we love conjunctions as much as we love the show Andor, which is great news for us. I'm Matt.
I'm Luke.
I'm Max.
And I'm Sway.
And this is Force for Thought. Today we'll be reviewing Andor, not only because collectively we love the show Andor, but because we have a special guest today, which is Sway, one of the coolest people I know.
Hello.
Hi, Sway. You recently just got into Star Wars, so like, what is it like? I guess some questions before we start reviewing Andor is like, what is it like being not 4 years old and watching Star Wars for the first time? Like, what is it like out in the world, not knowing much about Star Wars? / what got you into it?
Joke is on you. I am 4 years old. It's been great. I love it. You got me into Star Wars, I think. Well,
No, I don't think that's true. I would love to take credit for it, but I don't think
you
that's true.
got me watching Andor.
Did I? Okay,
yeah,
that makes you feel
did.
good about it.
I was watching The Last of Us, and
Like everyone did besides me.
yes, exactly. Can't
phenomenal.
believe. Yeah.
I didn't watch it. Don't
Okay.
worry.
We're forming teams already here.
And I loved it. It was very dark,
Mm-hmm.
and there were a lot of memes on the internet about the Mandalorian being like the light version of The Last of Us, like
Yeah.
the father-kid story, cowboy. And so I started watching The Mandalorian, and I think I was always really intimidated by Star Wars because I think sometimes I find franchises intimidating. I don't know
Yeah.
where to start. I love sci-fi. Like I watch any sci-fi that comes out, and
And you write sci-fi too, right?
I
You
write
just-
sci-fi.
we can talk about this later. I can cut this too, but you just wrote something else that I literally saw like
did.
right before we picked you up, and then I didn't mention it to you, and now I'm thinking about it now.
No, that's okay. I posted it on the airplane.
Yeah, we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, but I love sci-fi, but I was so intimidated by Star Wars, I think. And also, I think there's a way in which you absorb Star Wars through osmosis, just like being in the world. Like, I think one of your questions was like, what did I know about it? And like, obviously I've seen R2-D2 and like
Yeah.
Luke Skywalker and all of these Yoda, like all
Yeah.
of these characters. So there's a part of me that's like, had I ever seen Star Wars? Maybe. I don't know. But anyway, I started watching The Mandalorian, which I loved, and I started talking to you about it,
Yeah.
and you were like, you have to watch Andor.
Yeah.
And then we have a mutual friend, Matt Grippy, another
Yeah.
Matt, who also told me I had to watch Andor.
Yes.
And so I started watching it. And the first few episodes, I wasn't sure about. And I think both you and Grippy told me I had to stick with it.
Yeah. I think going from Mandalorian's a great entry point, I think, into Star Wars, and then I think going from that to Andor is kind of a culture shock.
Yeah.
Right. Also, just a caveat: Sway has not seen Rogue One
No.
or anything else in Star Wars, correct? Just
No,
besides
yeah.
Mandalorian and Andor.
Yeah.
So she's like in the infancy of going into the Star Wars fandom as well.
Yeah.
Is this so? Are we keeping this spoiler free?
Yeah, let's keep it spoiler free. I
No,
think she's got
well,
some
remember,
ideas.
I told you.
Yeah.
I know that Andor.
You said he doesn't make it out.
Yeah.
But I don't.
So that's okay to
let's
say.
try to keep it.
I will have a hard time with that.
Dude,
I'll,
are
I'll
you?
I'll try my best.
Are you?
But
But you know what?
I mean, are we about like the entire? I'm so interested in what you know and what you don't. Like, do you know who Luke's? Do you know who Luke Skywalker is? Like you said, like osmosis.
Yeah.
Like, you know the name.
Yeah.
Do you know who
That's
his
one of the
father
ones she
is?
called.
His
Oh,
father
oh.
is Darth Vader?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Because-
I guess I'm not going to get into like broad strokes spoilers of like movies, but I'm going to talk about like Mon Mothma's significance in the galaxy and like
I think you can do
Saw,
that.
Yeah.
Saw Gerrera, like
Oh yeah.
I'm not going to remember.
elements of Andor.
Yeah.
I just would be remiss if I didn't talk about that.
No.
Of course. Go for it.
She's seeing Rogue One in the Academy Museum Theater.
Yeah.
Like next month.
Yes.
And I feel like, because we were talking about you watching it before, and I was like, you can't ruin that experience to watch it at home versus in the theater, which is super, super cool.
Spoil away, though. I'm not
Okay.
sensitive to that.
We can spoil it away. So that's what you made watch Andor, was, I guess, kind of me, and then Grippy, which is also great. And you, I mean, again, through osmosis and just like as a living person who also works in like in entertainment, you know Star Wars and sci-fi and like weird references and stuff too. because I feel like something about Star Wars that I love about it as well, and then we can get into Andor, unless you guys have any other questions, because I'd be very interested. Because like how old were you when you guys watched Star Wars for the first time?
There are rumors that I was in the theater for The Phantom Menace. That was 99. I would have been 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I have a 1-year-old right now, and I have a hard time believing that they would bring 2-year-old me to the theater.
Well, you did grow up loving trade disputes, right?
From a very young age.
Do you think that's related?
Yeah.
So, I mean, my whole life, as long as I can remember.
Okay. Yeah.
So, talk about a big reveal for the podcast. Sway, I'll give you a little bit of background. I grew up watching A New Hope at my grandparents' house. Whenever I would go over there and they would watch me, I would always throw it on because they only had 2 movies on VHS, and it was A New Hope and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Secret of the Ooze.
Yeah, both
which is
great
also
ones.
fantastic.
Yeah,
I could
it
have
is.
a whole other podcast just on that. But
Who's
so
going to be part of it?
Oh, that's just a one-man show.
Okay, good.
So I watched A New Hope all the time, and I couldn't tell you the first time that I watched Empire or Return of the Jedi, but I mean, I've always known of them ever since a young age. I just only have memories from being very young of watching A New Hope. So young, in fact, that when I was 4 years old, my mother was pregnant, and she asked me and my brothers what we thought we should name the child, and we knew it was going to be a boy. And at the time, I was real big into Star Wars and Toy Story, so I told my mom that we had to name him either Woody or Luke, and she really liked Luke, and this is Luke. We're brothers.
Yeah, I'm
that
actually
a-
the Luke from the story. We are related by blood.
I can see in your face, your mind is blown right now.
Wait, is that a true story?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So Luke is named after Luke Skywalker.
Well, his
That's
his
so cool.
first name is Woodrow Lucas Taylor.
And he's keeping the tradition of Star Wars names in the family.
Yeah, I named my son Finn, but that was really a coincidence.
We also literally had this conversation yesterday without you two. Like Lynn told us basically this whole thing.
Oh, you spoiled it.
I know.
All right,
Yeah.
edit this. We'll put it in another episode.
Anyway, what I was going to say is I watched it when I was 4. I don't remember when I watched Empire or Return either. I remember being like 5 years old, I think, when Phantom came out. And then like I was going over to my uncle's house, who was a big fan of the original trilogy, and like went to go in like 77 to go see it a bunch of times, blah, blah, blah. But he had all these trading cards and stuff. And so he like gave me those because I was like the new generation of Star Wars fans in like 99. And I was like 5. But like I think something I really dig about Star Wars is that you can get super into it. Like Luke has like, I feel like all the knowledge of like the ship names, and same thing with Max is like these creature names or like the comics. And then like for me, it's more like I love the movies, and I do love that like the depth you can have to it. But I feel like you can go super in the weeds, or you can kind of stay surface level versus. And I do love Star Trek a lot too, but I feel like Star Trek is like very hard to like stay surface level. You can really just like kind of have to dive into it to understand like what the Federation is, and then understand where these people are and what timelines are and what. Now that I'm saying that out loud, that kind of sounds like Star Wars also, but I swear it's a little different.
A little different.
But
Can I
yeah,
ask you guys a question?
please,
Yeah.
ask away.
As young Star Wars watchers, were any of the storylines scary?
Yes. No, for you guys,
I
Darth
don't-
Maul wasn't
I don't
scary.
think so I
Darth
remember
Maul was probably scary. Yeah.
Darth
I
Vader,
would have been
too.
6 years old when I first saw him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Also in the theaters.
I
that's
remember
definitely scary.
when I
Yeah.
was 8, Revenge of the Sith was coming out, and that was the first Star Wars movie to be rated PG-13.
Mhm.
And I remember talking on the bus with my friends if our parents were going to let us see it. And I was the youngest of 4 boys growing up, and so I was always, watching PG-13 movies from a relatively young age, and so it was never really a question for me. But I remember that was like a big debate on the school bus if
Yeah.
it was like too mature for us or too scary. And I remember I watched it, and I remember thinking like, I would not be surprised if some of those kids on the school bus would find this too scary.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I never did, but I think it's definitely a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, Vader is one of the best villains of all time, I think, right? Because he is scary. He just
Yeah.
inherently is freaky because you don't know what he's thinking or what he's seeing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's like, now it's like, oh yeah, I can say that because it's like you don't know, like, you can't see his eyes and where he's looking and stuff. But I think back then it's like
You
just
don't
something in
know.
your subconscious where it's
Yeah.
just kind of like, yeah, that's freaky. I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think that was scary. And then, yeah, I think it also weirdly makes space unscary. Because, like, I hate the idea of, like, in Interstellar, when he's gone for, like, was it 30 seconds? It's actually, like, 50 years or 30
Yeah.
years. And, like, that, I hate that concept, and that literally freaks me out. Like that time can just like literally slip away. Where in Star Wars they go from planet to galaxy, whatever, and it's like it doesn't matter. It's all it's all fine. It's all gravy. I feel like that makes sci-fi a little unscary, which I think why I like it so much, because I think sci-fi can be super scary and dystopian, and it kind of is. But yeah, like the war stuff never really freaked me out, which now it probably freaks me out more. But like it was more like Darth Vader and stuff, and I think it was more like just full of mystery, which was why I really liked it. And you have creatures and aliens and droids, and
I also think
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think as a kid, something that's like really attractive about like something that's kind of scary is it's thrilling. I played video games as a kid, and like it was like a challenge to be afraid and to like experience fear in a safe way.
yeah.
So
in like a super safe way.
Yeah,
to be like,
and with popcorn in a movie theater.
It's scary, but I'm safe.
Yeah.
I was just about to say, I think the most scared I've ever been watching Star Wars is in episode 6 in the beginning in Jabba's palace. There's a lot of really funky creatures, and like C-3PO's coming in and he's all scared, and it's like the focal point for the audience, and so we're scared by association, and he's like scared of all the Gamorrean guards and the spider things, and I was watching it and I'm like, oh, this is scary, and Bib Fortuna is scary, and then they have the Jedi rocks, and it's like, oh, this is fun, and then Salacious Crumb is like, oh god, I'm scared again. It was really a roller coaster when you were a kid.
We were just talking about how Return of the Jedi is really freaky. The dream sequence is freaky. Sorry, I'm thinking of Empire. I'm gonna cut it. But the dream sequence is freaky in Empire.
The dream sequence in Empire is very scary.
It's very scary. And then at the end of Return, though, when he's underneath in the throne room and Vader's looking for him, I'm just gonna repeat what I just said. I'm just gonna insert what I said in a couple episodes ago here. But like that is freaky.
I just want to acknowledge that for the audience that will not see this.
Yes.
That a very judgmental look transpired when you got the movie wrong.
Yeah. Oh, it happens a lot. One of my biggest flubs of my entire life was Max is already laughing. Me and Max, we're just like in your basement, like hanging out. I think we were watching realistically probably
just the two of us.
Yeah, it was just the two of us. There was like no pressure. Like we're best friends. We're hanging out, and I was like, yeah, you know, when Empire Strikes Back came out in 1982, and Max was like, oh, it was 1980. And like my face, I feel like it just dropped.
You did.
Because I was like, I've never gotten that wrong in my entire life.
In front of no one but his best friend of almost 10 years, he was like, this is the most shamed I've ever been in my whole life.
Yeah. I was like, it's 77, 80, 83, 99, 2002, 2005.
Yeah. His reaction was like, I knew that. I knew that. Why did I just say that? I know that.
It was. It's also been 11 years.
11 years?
Yeah.
Oh, man. We are getting old, Matthew.
Yeah, time flies.
Speaking of age, though, I think it's interesting because I don't think I was ever afraid watching Star Wars, but I think it's because I did start watching it at such a young age that, like, I don't remember experiencing Star Wars for the first time. It was just, like, always there in my life. When I just started forming memories, it was just, like, already there.
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, I think there was a lot of Star Wars that, as I got older, just started to make more sense because I don't remember the first time that I watched that dream sequence on Dagobah in Empire, but I do remember being a kid and just thinking, like, I have no idea what that is. Like, is he dead? And then he shows up later and you're like, so he's not dead? Well, like, what just happened there?
I remember not knowing that was Luke's face in Vader's mask when I was young.
Really?
Until I was, like, pretty old. Like, at least a teenager. Like, I had no idea what that sequence was until...
You know, in that sequence, that's... the model... Mark Hamill wasn't happy with the head that they used. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if this is something that like.
No, keep going. It's a fun story. Though.
No. I'm gonna cut it because it's one of those things when you're like, did you know actually this happened? It's like, yeah, it's like one of the most known facts.
Did you know that Viggo Mortensen broke his toe when he kicked the helmet and the scream was real?
And Gandalf's wearing a watch. Yeah. I'm gonna cut it.
Are you the eldest boy?
No, I am.
Is that in your head because of Succession right now?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I am
well, when he said I
3 or
wasn't
4.
afraid of anything, I wondered if it was an older brother thing. No.
No, I don't think so.
I'm going to backtrack as well.
Because I still
say,
have a lot of fears.
Yeah. I'm going to backtrack and say maybe it wasn't scared because like my, I think I grew up like.
Now nobody was afraid.
I still was.
I'm afraid of a lot of things. I'll still say I was definitely afraid of the Empire scene, but I think like looking back, I was like, my mom's favorite characters in almost all movies are like the villains. Like I grew up, her favorite movie is Wizard of Oz, and the Wicked Witch is her favorite character of all time. And so I think that is inherently scarier maybe than Darth Vader. I still think what I said about Darth Vader is scary, but then like growing up, I was like Batman the animated series, all the villains are cooler, and so like I think there was something that I liked about the freakiness of that maybe, but that the Empire scene is really spooky, and same thing with the Return of the Jedi ending.
I'm going to try to segue this back into Andor by going to Rogue One, because Sway, you're about to experience Rogue One for the first time, so I'm not going to give any spoilers for it, but I will say I think the only time I was scared during a Star Wars movie was in the last 2 minutes of Rogue One.
Oh.
It's very good.
That's interesting. I was going to say, like, as a father, I'm trying to think of what the scariest parts are going to be like when I show my kids one day, and I'm wondering if it's just like desensitized to all the scenes from the prequels and the original trilogy because I've seen them so many times. Like, I remember being scared in Return of the Jedi, and I know a lot of people are scared in Empire Strikes Back, but I think the scariest part in all of Star Wars is the Rise of Skywalker on Exegol with Palpatine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's freaky.
I was 22 when that came out, and I was kind of spooked.
Yeah.
And you see like the deformed face of Palpatine and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's the part I'm going to be most hesitant to show kids.
That's a good point.
Spoiler for Rise of Skywalker. But you'll forget. You're like, I don't know what you're talking about,
No.
Exegol or any of this stuff is going on. Anyway, let's circle back to Andor. Max, what were you going to say about Andor?
No, I was just using Rogue One as a
Oh,
segue.
yes, you are. Well, let's segue back into Andor. So I don't really know where to start with reviewing it necessarily, besides, kind of positives and negatives. But, like, I think collectively Andor is all of our three, at least, favorite shows in Star Wars. Besides Max, when we talked about the best thing Disney has done, chose the last season of Clone Wars. Just kind of not be devil's advocate, but to kind of add something new to the conversation. But, like, it's the best thing, I think, in Star Wars since the original trilogy. So what do you like better... Sway, do you like Andor or Mando better, I guess?
I think Andor is the better story and show.
But Mando's fun to watch, too,
Mando
right?
is just fun to
Yeah.
watch. I think you described it as pulpy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is, and it's a live-action cartoon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's hard for me to pick, like, which one is... Andor is objectively better.
I think so, too.
But,
I think it's
yeah,
some of the coolest things that we've ever seen in Star Wars. We were talking about this a couple weeks ago, but like we have like implied sex, we have a lesbian couple, like
Yeah.
that stuff is just like super new in Star Wars, and like it doesn't affect like really watching it, but it's like the way I actually wrote it down because I've said it before and I messed it up the one time I said it, but the way I think I usually say this is Mandalorian is everything I want to see in Star Wars, meaning the nostalgia, the characters, everything, right, that's going forward. And then Andor is everything I didn't know I wanted to see in Star Wars yet, which is exactly, I think, what it should be, which is always progressing forward and showing you new things. And I think a big positive that Andor has is that it relies almost zero on, like, nostalgia, which is weird coming from a show that is based off of a character already in a movie. And yet, there's, like, no nostalgia tied to it, to me. And it's like Rogue One, I know we've talked about this before, but Rogue One is, like, my third favorite Star Wars movie of all time out of those 11. And so I feel like for a movie that's that high up, even for me, it's like it relies next to nothing on nostalgia.
Yeah, it's really an incredible feat that Rogue One is a prequel to A New Hope, and Andor is a prequel to Rogue One.
Yeah.
And Andor is the most original storytelling we've ever gotten in Star Wars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing else? Dead air?
No, I agree. I got nothing else.
Wait,
to
did you prepare at all for this episode?
I got mental notes.
Oh, no, he didn't
I got
prepare
my
for this
IMDb.
episode.
No, I got
That, you didn't
notes.
text when you were on your way over?
So one thing that I was gonna say actually, and I kind of smirked when you said like it's the objectively better show, is I usually
Does
don't
you
like
agree?
it when people try to talk about like objectivity in art, because I'm like, it's so subjective. You can't say that anything is objective. But I feel like Andor is the closest thing to being able to say like
Yeah.
it is objectively like the best thing.
I know.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
it's
Star
indisputable
Wars.
that
It
it's
really is.
more cleverly written,
Yeah.
better acted, better directed. The set design is better.
Yes.
There's
It's-
just every metric that you could possibly objectify, it exceeds it.
Yeah.
The acting, the writing.
The VFX is better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Which
really is.
Is it to me an interesting thing because I see like I always see Lucasfilm talking about the volume and being able to shoot on that giant screen and how great it is, and I've never watched Mandalorian or anything else and been taken out of it because of the visual effects. Like I always thought that it looked totally fine and natural. I didn't have anything against it, and then as soon as that first trailer before Andor dropped,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was different.
Yeah.
You could tell, and it was weird. Like you couldn't put your finger on it, but you knew that it wasn't Shadow
Like,
of the Volume.
that
So you're
looks
like,
real.
I guess that's the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that.
And overall, Star Wars, it was originally meant for kids. Like George Lucas talks about that all the time. Like, oh yeah, these are movies for kids. And I feel like Star Wars has always kind of like tried to stay true to that. And I feel like Andor
By its
is
fault,
the
right?
first time where they really stepped it up and being like, no, we're gonna mature this content.
Yeah.
We're gonna like step it up a little bit and kind of have it like grow with the audience.
Yes.
And I think that's why Andor and Rogue One resonate so much with people, because it's a little bit darker, it's a little bit grittier, it's more realistic. It doesn't have like that lighthearted touch of Mandalorian, which I enjoy. But going back to what you said, Matt, Andor is like the show that you didn't know. It's not the show that you wanted, but it's the show that you needed.
Yeah.
And after you see it, you're like, oh, like it kind of, in my opinion, sets a new standard for Star Wars moving forward.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I also think like we always talk about like the writing in Mandalorian, which is like I mean, it is incredible writing. I think it's done on purpose. I don't want to say incredible writing. It's good writing, I think, for the show. I'm backing myself in a corner. I want to be friends with all the writers. But like in Mandalorian, when they go in season 3, when they go to save the kid, and they're like, we're gonna set up camp here, and then we see them setting up camp. It's
Yeah.
like we always talk about.
Ragnar. His,
Yeah.
his name is Ragnar.
Oh my god.
Luke is
But,
the
like,
only one that liked that episode.
Yeah, Luke loves that episode. But it is one of those things though where it's like, yeah, you show versus tell, and then they just weirdly do both, which
Yeah.
is odd. We're like Andor, it's like every single scene, every single line of dialogue, it seems like so craftily and perfectly done. And it's like, it's odd because that's a whole other conversation too, where it's like Tony Gilroy, who wrote it, and it's like a showrunner, says he like isn't a Star Wars fan, which is really interesting versus like Dave Filoni or like Jon Favreau, who are Star Wars fans. And I think it's like, in one regard, it's like good to have that separation, but on the other hand, it's like, no, you kind of want people that are taking care of that property as well. But again, it's like a separate thing, I think, because Filoni and Favreau both are taking care of legacy characters versus
Yeah.
Tony Gilroy, who's kind of doing his own thing. Something else I really dig about the show is I love watching Star Wars on a week-to-week basis, as we always talk about. But I think something that it really has going for it is in Kenobi, which, are you going to watch Kenobi as well? Okay, you should watch Kenobi. You should watch the movies
can
first.
spoil it.
Okay, but
Yeah.
watch the movies first as well. It's not a massive spoiler, but I think on a week-to-week basis, people consistently have gotten this weird mentality where they need to have instant gratification over everything.
Yeah.
And so, like, not so much in like Succession or anything, or like those like big dramas, but like for things that like are deeply in this nerd culture, where this character, the Grand Inquisitor, dies, and it's in the canon that he's known to survive. And so I think on a week-to-week basis, people are consistently complaining and like, I don't know, like poo-pooing it, that it's like, oh, this character Dax isn't dead and blah blah blah, where like you have to wait a week or two to like understand that like he actually is alive and like not actually dead. Versus Andor doesn't really come with any of that baggage. We kind of already, Rogue One's out, we kind of have the expectations, and then they just don't have to follow through consistently and please people, giving them instant gratification. They can like let things simmer, introduce you to new characters, and then you kind of you see where those go.
Yeah, I think what was the pacing of Andor is something that you and I have talked about a
Yeah.
lot. And it really is like 3 different stories across the season, and the pacing really takes its time.
Yeah.
And for me personally, I think I told you I almost checked out
Yeah.
because I was like, who's this Andor guy? I don't know
Yeah.
that he seems like a nice, cool guy.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you told me to stick with it because, and I like that the storytellers took the chance of letting that slow burn happen,
Yeah.
because you do see how it pays off in a way that the week-to-week property just could never.
Yeah, and then it's great because the payoff is, even in an episode, you have so much buildup.
Yeah.
And then even that release at the end of the episodes, it doesn't always. We just rewatched the episode last night when they rob the bank.
The Aldani heist.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh my God, left and right, I'm getting
The
corrected.
Imperial
Thank you.
payroll.
Thank you. But they rob that, right? And then it's like it all goes to hell
It's
instantly.
so deflating.
yeah.
Yeah.
But like the whole lead up is great.
Yeah.
So when I was watching Andor the first time through, I felt like that was the first time where it really started to like hit me.
It feels like
because,
a
you said,
finale.
like the pacing and everything. It was like it felt like a little bit slow, and you didn't really like know if it was good or not. At least for me, until the Aldani heist, when you finally got to see that happen, and I was like, oh, okay, this is actually really good.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was an exact moment, and it was when the kid that was on the crew, Nemec, gets
Yep.
crushed
That's exactly the
by
moment.
by that
Yep.
pile that is it money crates
Credits.
Yeah.
credits crates of credits. I don't know. When he gets crushed by that, like I like actually jumped when I was watching that. I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe that just happened. And then like they were like, oh, and they like took him to the doctor, and they're like, oh, okay, like we're gonna see if we can make it better. And I was like, okay, this feels right. And then he dies, and I was like, oh my gosh. And
Yeah.
then that was
Yeah.
like the moment where I was like, oh, this show's different.
Yeah.
Like this is like kind of dark and not like the others, and then it kind of like just keeps escalating from there. In my opinion, kind of peaking at the Narkina 5 breakout. That is, in my
Yeah.
opinion, that episode is one of the best episodes of
Yeah.
television ever.
Would you say
Yeah.
it's one of your favorite quotes as well? Still,
I can't swim.
I can't swim. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's iconic.
Yeah.
We're getting the T-shirts made.
oh my god,
The,
Luke, you
the
said-
Aldani heist was a really big turning point for me as well. The lead up was significant, such that at the end of episode 5, just knowing that next episode was going to be the conclusion of that Aldani heist, like
Yeah.
that was one of the most exciting weeks of
I
my entire
agree.
year. And it felt like the build up between episodes 8 and 9, and it was just
Yeah.
like of the movies, and it was just 2 weeks in the middle of a series.
Yeah.
And when the heist started, and you have all this background of who these characters are, and that they've been planning it for months, but Cassian doesn't really know what's going on, and they just go in and they start taking hostages, and there's a kid hostage, and you're like, oh my god, is this really the plan?
Yeah.
Like, are
Yeah.
they even the good guys? Like, where is this going? And just not knowing and going on that ride,
It's that gray
was
area.
my favorite arc. I know you like Narkina 5, but I'm an Aldani stan.
I
The
agree.
Eye of Aldani visually,
Yeah.
narratively,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
way that they craft their heist around a legitimate distraction, and they don't have to like shoehorn in some
I
kind of
agree.
other
I
distraction.
totally agree.
And it's like you buy into it instantly. They're like, here's this thing that always happens. You're like, yeah, it does
Yeah.
always happen. I know
Yeah.
that now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great.
That's what, yeah, this whole show, like, that's a good example where everything just feels very natural. Like, it doesn't feel like anything's being written, like, for the characters to do. Like, they're just kind of, like, living naturally with the consequences. And I think one good example of that is, like, I heard somebody talking about how Andor doesn't really accomplish much. Like, he's just kind of like along for the ride with everything. Like, they could have made him be like this superhero front runner of the show, kind of like Din Djarin or the Mandalorian,
Yeah.
you know, where he's like leading everything and he's the action hero. But he kind of takes a backseat in his own show and lets a lot of the other characters shine.
He's literally on vacation and
Yeah.
gets captured. He's like, this story's over.
Yeah.
And then it's like, no, it's not.
And then he goes to prison, and does he lead some sort of crazy revolution and a prison breakout? No, they let
No.
Kino Lloyd do that
Yeah.
because it's more natural for his character to do it. And
Yeah.
it's like it's a bunch of moments like that.
I think you're exactly right. They really subverted my expectations, and I felt it in the prison because I expected him to come onto the assembly line and
Yeah.
crush it, like figure out how to do it very quickly and save the day, and
Yeah.
it just that's not the show. And I think when you're talking about both the prison break and the heist, there's so much. They do everything. They're
Yeah.
like there's so much grit and people trying to do everything right and trying to overcome,
Yeah.
and then it just doesn't pan out, and then you can't swim.
Yeah.
Like you do everything
Gonna cry.
impossible that you make it happen, and then you can't swim.
Mhm.
That's what Luthen, we talked about this yesterday when he's talking about, like, basically he's fighting for the sun he'll never see rise. I know that's a
Yeah.
really butchered quote, and that's not what he says at all, but the sentiment is there.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is just like the basis of Star Wars that I love, and I think this show does it really well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, there's just like they're fighting for freedom if it ever comes, which is great. With that being said, I also think you guys are crazy. I think I think you're all crazy, actually, because episode 1, not you necessarily, because you're not so ingrained in Star Wars, but in the first episode, I was like, oh my, like, I think I've said this before, but like, Andor is my least favorite part of Rogue One. I like don't really understand him, and I don't think you're supposed to. But in the first 10 minutes, I completely turned around and it was like, oh, this is a really interesting character. I'm very excited to see where he goes. I actually don't know anything about him. And then beyond that, coming off of the heels of Boba Fett, I believe, right? Kind of.
You mean in release order?
In release order, correct. Yeah, right?
I think Kenobi was before it.
Yeah, but it was like Boba Fett, Kenobi, right?
Then
Okay,
Andor,
I'm
yeah.
getting that mentally right. But then you see a show like Boba Fett that does flashbacks so wrong. And then you get the flashbacks of Andor as a kid, and it's intriguing, not only just story-wise, but it's like gripping how it looks. It kind of feels like Alien or Aliens, like the way it's shot. And then you have like this tribal kid against the Empire, and he has literally no weapons. He's going against blasters. And I think that is like such an interesting contrast visually. But then beyond that, it's just like, whoa, we're actually getting a lot of information done really well. And I think I was looking up for this episode just to see what people said that is bad about Andor. And people are like, it is the pacing. And it is pretty slow. Like, especially like coming in, right? Like, but it is that release that you just have to wait for, and it builds up, which is great. And like in the procession is like one of the most tense and maybe best edited scenes I've ever seen in my entire life, and not just Star Wars but anything. And I think it's to the credit, like you said, to the filmmakers to be able to actually like sit with it and let it kind of simmer in a world where you want things like Star Wars and these massive IPs to like just kind of give you whatever. And I think I wrote something down that I don't know if it makes much sense, but I think Mandalorian, or like things that are really quick, they're 30 minutes, they're very fun, but then I compare it to like eating potato chips for dinner. You just feel empty afterwards. And it's like, that was great during it, right? You're like, I love sour cream and onion chips, and I ate a whole bag.
Those are the worst of the chips.
No, they're not. What do you like, salt and vinegar better?
No,
Oh, yeah,
sour cream and
absolutely.
onion
Salt
are
and
great.
vinegar.
Yes, they
Yeah.
are, right?
Barbecue. I'll take original.
It's insane to me. Luke?
I don't really care for salt and vinegar.
Okay, that's all I need. That's all I need. That's all I need. So I feel like, but you just kind of feel empty afterwards, and it's like whatever. It's like, but if you have like a nice like steak dinner and you're taking your time with it, like that's so much more rewarding.
Yeah.
And I think that's how I would kind of compare the two. I love Mandalorian. With that being said, that's just like top of my mind because they're both the most obviously not recent, I guess, but like those are the biggest,
The most relevant today.
yeah, Star Wars
Yeah.
shows in general. So I feel like that's. I don't know. I just like I really genuinely love Andor. I think it's got rewatch value. It's got those surprise moments, and something that we were talking about yesterday. We were talking about weeks ago. Maybe we were talking about weeks ago as well. that I think Andor brings to life your fears really well. Like when Nemec gets crushed, it's like he can't feel his legs. Like that is like a scary thought. When Andor's mom passes away, and B2 doesn't fully understand why he has to leave, or like why, like what's going on. Like all those fears are legitimate fears that we all have in our not daily lives, but in our lives, and then we're able to see them kind of be brought on screen.
When Bix gets tortured by children.
Yeah,
screams.
exactly. Well, oh my god,
Yeah.
Bex. Yes. Also, Bex is a great character too.
Yeah.
I really like her. But I think it does that really well. I mean, like that's a huge thing to be able to not only we just named like 3 examples right now. I'm sure if we really dove in, there'd be multiple. The same thing with like living a double life with Luthen. I think all of that's, or like the spy that he basically is like, you have to be in this. Like there's just so
Lonnie.
many of these fears. Lonnie, yes, yeah, you said
Or-
I'm just a
Not being
Wikipedia
able to
plugin.
swim.
yeah, we're not being able to swim.
Yeah.
Oh my god, literally like just like 6 of them right now, and it's just like I think that does it really well, and it's like. In the moment, you don't think about it because it's just like a subconscious thing. Same with Darth Vader. Is that, oh yeah, you can't see what he's looking at. There's no emotion. And so I think, yeah, I mean, I think Andor does that great. I don't know. Anybody have that?
When you were talking about
Yeah.
like trying to see like some of the weaknesses that people have with it, like looking it up.
Yeah.
I kind of did the same thing too, because
It was upsetting.
Andor is an interesting TV show where it kind of flew under the radar because,
Yeah.
like we talked about, it is a prequel of a prequel, you know. So it's like a lot of the people who kind of want to hate Star Wars didn't go out of their way to watch it like they would like some of the other content. So I feel like a lot of the people that watched it were the people that were genuinely interested, and I feel like a lot of the feedback has been very honest. So with that said, some of the negative feedback that I saw most commonly was just that it didn't feel like Star Wars. And I feel like a lot of people were also saying that as a pro.
Yeah.
Like they were like, yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like Star Wars, but maybe that's a good thing, because
Yeah.
if you keep trying to make Star Wars again, you can't recapture that magic, and it just always comes off as like a cheap knockoff.
I agree.
Whereas this feels like an evolution of Star Wars.
To me, it feels like Star Wars because Star Wars is about a feeling it gives you, I think. But I feel like I lost my train of thought. I shouldn't have said that. I should have broken that.
I will say I'd seen similar things. Having not really seen Star Wars, one of the reviews I saw was that like, oh, this show could be on HBO.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the same thought that like there's such an audience for this even beyond people who are, fans of the franchise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It gets into like why we all love Star Wars, and we've talked about it a little bit before that it's different for all of us. I really like the lore and the otherworldliness of it, and like Matt is more into it as a film student, and he likes the more technical aspects. And Andor is my favorite show, and it just happens to be the most technically well made one, but it still introduces all this fascinating lore with Aldani, with the Imperial slave labor camps, and Ferrix, and the Time Grappler, and like all this stuff that is just a little bit different than the world we live in. And that's what I look for. Like typically I look for also, like Force and mystical stuff and alien designs and creatures, and Andor does not have much of that per se, which is like the thing I look for most. So it really is surprising. Like if you pulled up the stats of the show and the stats of what I like and don't care about, like it is surprising that I like Andor so much, because the writing and just the storytelling is so captivating that even if there's a lower amount of lore and story and world building in it, it's still just so much more captivating for me to watch.
Yeah.
It just, I think, goes to show how important execution is, because this is kind of like when you just pitch the idea, like after seeing Rogue One, like, oh, hey, how about you get like how many episodes are there? 13 episodes of
12
Andor?
Andor?
12?
Yeah.
Like a 12 episode miniseries giving you Cassian Andor's background. I feel like a lot of people would be like, I feel like that's kind of
Why?
unnecessary.
I was
Yeah.
one of them. Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, like
I
he was kind of like the worst part of Rogue One, right?
Yeah.
Like everyone else was so much more interesting, and so like it's
You said that. too.
yeah. So
Give me
it's just,
Bodhi.
it's interesting that how just doing something well can carry it such a far way, because I think Star Wars have had a lot of very good ideas recently that weren't well executed.
Yeah.
And I feel like this idea is just very meh, but it's being executed perfectly.
Yeah, and then you're skipping over one of the things that is in my notes is that it's 12 episodes. We're dealing with 6 episodes with Kenobi that should have either been a movie or 10 episodes.
Well, and that's the big difference, right? Because I feel like Andor knows what it is. Kenobi didn't know what it was.
Yes, I
Kenobi
agree.
was a movie that wanted to be a TV show,
Yes.
or maybe vice versa. And like the pacing kind of reflects that a little bit. This show, it knows exactly what it is and what it's trying to do, and there's consistency throughout. There is no moment where like in between episodes you're like, well, how did that character get to this point?
Yeah.
Everything it follows very, very consistently. There's some parts in Boba Fett, Obi-Wan, probably some parts in Mando where there's just like that little bit of inconsistency, right, between the characters. I mean, it's hard to come up with a negative for this show because there's so many positives. We've talked about so many of them already. The writing, the visual effects. We haven't talked a whole lot about the acting, but the acting is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
If I were to come up with any sort of like negatives for the show, I would be grasping at straws. I would say I would kind of disagree with you a little bit, Matt, with what you were saying about the flashbacks. I feel like the flashbacks were executed very well, but never really came around because that was all part of like his sister, and like I feel like that side plot kind of like faded away.
Season
kinda
2,
quickly.
baby.
Exactly. I know it's coming back. I know it's coming back, but that's kind of like my only thing that I would say is I'm like, that didn't really pay out as much as some of these other plot points did, I think. But like everything else that I've seen that are like critiques, it's just like you're grasping at straws. Like people are like, oh, there's not enough aliens in it. Like there's not enough creatures and stuff for me. It's like,
there's enough in Mandalorian.
yeah.
Do you have any negatives as well?
I think when I was saying the pacing initially, I almost checked out. I wouldn't even say is a negative.
Yeah.
Like it was, I almost got lost and just stopped. But when I can't remember who mentioned the procession, but the pacing is so mastered in that episode, and it was sort of like we've been in control this whole season.
Yeah.
And here's how it feels.
Yeah.
And it was just, it like challenged me as a viewer to be like, well, I should stick with things like this.
Yeah.
And I have gotten really lazy with pacing because I've been fed very pulpy
Yeah.
content,
Mhm.
and I had an expectation of something on Disney Plus that like just this didn't meet that expectation, and that was a challenge for me. And so I wouldn't even say that was a negative.
Yeah.
It just like was something where maybe I would have checked out earlier, but I did appreciate being challenged like that by the end of the season.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is challenging. It's like reading a complicated book sometimes.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it actually is worth it. Or having a steak dinner versus potato chips. Luke, do you have any negatives?
No.
Neither do
I don't
I.
have anything I can possibly say. honestly.
Honestly, I can't either. And I usually find at least a couple negatives in something, especially movies or TV shows. I'm like, oh, they should have done this or whatever. And that's like, I mean, I love the score too. Sway and I were talking
Yeah.
about this. Is like Nicholas Bertel not only was scoring Andor, but Succession as well at
Yeah.
the same time. Like two of the best shows on TV.
Yeah.
It's just so good. And I
Yeah.
think the one I watched a review. I don't know who it was, and I doubt they'll listen to it, so it doesn't matter. But they were talking about how the mood the music never fit the mood of the show. It never showed the emotion. And I hardcore disagree with that.
Yeah, I do too.
But then B, while that person was giving a review of music being bad and not fitting the tone, there was an uppity Hispanic guitar in the background.
Yeah.
And I was like, talk about music choice, my
Yeah,
friend. Like, it
yeah.
actually made me angry.
Yeah.
I would never comment on someone's stuff to say they're bad. It's bad because I think people should do whatever they want and everything is objective, but that was legitimately bad.
We also haven't talked about how the intro changes
It does.
every episode.
Yes, I do love that.
Subtly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
noticed that too.
I did
Yeah.
not notice that.
Yeah, the music?
I
the
would
music
re-listen.
changes.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
It's great. Yeah, put on that score.
Oh,
It's
I gotta listen.
I
Yeah.
know.
Interesting.
It's cool because like yeah, and in the ending, I've noticed throughout the score, I've been listening to it in the background this past week, is that they have those little intro notes as well throughout some of the score, which is great. And I'm like, oh, like I wonder if it's moments of like Andor being heroic or Andor whatever, or if it's like alluding to something. I'm sure there's like a great interview with Nicholas Bertel. Or it'll come out that with his thinking behind it because that just always intrigues me.
I would love to hear that.
Yeah.
Something we haven't talked about that I really love too, which are the villains of this season. They're both super great and they're both different. What, Luke?
Who do you mean by both?
I would say Dedra and Cyril.
I would not say Cyril is a villain.
Oh, he's a villain.
He's a
That's
character
interesting.
of unfortunate circumstances, but he's not a bad
He's
guy.
helping Dedra.
That is so that's not an uncommon opinion. I feel like there's interestingly a large group of people that are almost rooting for Cyril.
I would,
As you
I'm
should definitely
unfamiliar
not
with
be.
this. I would put myself in that camp.
What?
I would find myself rooting for Cyril for most of the time.
Why? Because you don't like his mom?
Well, of course, I don't like his mom, but Cyril is not an Imperial. He's literally not an Imperial.
he's a tryhard. No one likes a tryhard.
He's working for the Corpos, and he's just trying to do his job. He is ordered not to follow up on the murder of his two, co-workers, and he does it anyway because he thinks it's right. Like he has heroic moments. They're just showed to us from the other side of his point of view. And like it's just his own bad luck that then he encounters Cassian and Luthen and then gets thrown from not even grace, like he was mediocre in his job, and then he gets thrown down the tubes to being completely ostracized. And then he has to go back home to his mother, back to Coruscant, to the lower levels, and we learn a lot about him. And he's like a Luke Skywalker-esque character in a sense that we learn about his upbringing and that he looked up at the sun and dreamed of being something bigger. Like that scene when he is in his room looking up at the sun through the layers of Coruscant, like that reminded me a lot of the binary sunset. But while Luke Skywalker was looking at the setting of two suns, Cyril Karn is looking up through dozens or hundreds of layers of city to see the sun for only a couple hours or minutes a day. And it's just such a stark contrast from that. And then, they have the same desire to get out and begin the hero's journey. And then Cyril does and just fails so spectacularly, not because he's evil and not even because he's bad at it, because
He's
of
working way too
circumstances.
hard.
Yeah, but he is. You might not think he's a villain, but he is the villain of the show, right? Because he's the antithesis of Andor. If Andor is our protagonist, he is the antagonist because he is against our protagonist.
And even their whole arc is like he's working so hard within the system to achieve.
Yeah.
And I think that like Andor is the opposite of that, where he's like the ultimate slacker. Like
He's the rebel.
He's the ultimate rebel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They contrast like that
Yeah.
as characters, but
Yeah.
not like as in terms of their stories. Like it's not like Cyril's ever working against Andor. Like he's trying to find Andor and he wants revenge against Andor.
Right.
Isn't that
Cyril is
wait.
working,
Yeah.
trying to make his life better, trying to get some sort of status for his mom, for Uncle Arlo. He's not like the driving force against Andor. That's Dedra. That's
True.
actively hunting
Yeah, that
him.
is true. I just more mean their arcs.
Yeah.
Like I see how they go in different directions, and one can create a kind of evil. I guess both can
Yeah,
create a kind
I
of
agree.
evil.
Their arcs
Yeah.
are kind of mirrors of each other,
Yeah.
but that doesn't make him the villain.
I guess that's true because Andor does some shady things too.
Yeah, he does.
He
Yeah.
straight up kills Skeen,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah, I mean, Andor's not a
Yeah.
hero
No.
by many
No.
objective terms.
we live in that gray area. I guess I've never thought about that before. I still think he's a villain, but I am not more on your side. I guess I'm more on your side. I would go more like left into like your realm. You're sitting on my left, is why I say that. But like it feels like it's like there is this gray area, but I think it is rebels versus the system is
Yeah.
like the ultimate thing. And in Star Wars, no, the system is bad.
Yeah.
Well, Cyril also works against the system by his uniform adjustments. Like, he's always changing. Like that's
Oh man,
Nemec talks about the smallest acts of insurrection push our lines forward, and I know you're gonna say I'm grasping at straws, but that is how Cyril is rebelling right now in his story. He's not falling in line with the people. He just wants to be better, and he wants to work to help himself and to help his fellow coworkers, and he does what he thinks is best. He never acts out of hate or greed. He is doing what he thinks is best. He's just misguided right now. Cyril is one of the most fascinating characters in this show, and I kind of take offense that you think he's a villain.
so you take offense. So real quick, R5 and Cyril are like your people, your droid.
I like R5 too.
All right.
I think Cyril's absolutely a villain. I think that's a very interesting.
I wish
I
everybody
think
could see
that's a
Luke's
very
face.
interesting take, but no, I think they did such a good job with making him a character that you like to hate.
Yeah.
Because of
Why
like the
do you
little
hate
things.
Cyril? He's so
Because he's a tryhard. He adjusts his
Yeah.
uniform so it fits better. He makes plans without running it up the chain of command. He can't rally his own troops.
Yeah.
He stalks women. There's a whole bunch of reasons to not like him.
He's the kid in school who's like, you forgot to collect our homework.
Yeah, he
is,
definitely is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Luke's like, that was me.
no, that's Leia. That is so. All these things are so similar to Leia, just from a different point of view.
No, Leia would never work in the system. She's always anti-system. She's like 6 years old in Kenobi and is like, yeah, I don't like the man.
She is an Imperial senator.
Yeah, that's true, but she's got gusto.
Cyril has gusto.
You're grasping at straws, and so am I now.
Well, I'm not going to spend this whole episode fighting a 1v3 in defense of Cyril Karn, but I do think he is underrated and underappreciated.
Yes.
I think he's a very good character.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
As a bad guy, yeah. Sorry, I just want to see if I can get you one more time going on it.
It just seems so uncharacteristically stupid of you, Matthew, to insist on classifying the characters as good guys or bad guys, especially in a show as complex as Andor.
Hey, I said protagonist and antagonist. It's a little more highbrow.
Okay.
Yeah,
There is room in the middle, and I think Cyril fits snugly.
there is some room in the middle. Yeah, I also think we talked about like the casting is great. I think it being sectioned off into 3 different. I just kind of realized that like also Clone Wars season 7 kind of does the same format where it's like 3 episodes, kind of arcing it out, which is I don't love the transparency of it because you can kind of tell Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 kind of structure of those. But ultimately, I feel like it is really satisfying if it's done right, like in Clone Wars, or if it's done right in Andor as well.
Yeah.
Which I really like.
I remember when they announced that structure, and so like we knew going into it that it was going to be structured like that, and I was a little worried in between the Narkina 5 arc and the Aldani arc that it was gonna like this was such a high from the Aldani arc. I don't know how they're gonna get right off this momentum and then start again with a new arc. And they had that episode in the middle where he went to Space Miami and got taken by K2SO, and that was really good, and I was worried that they were going to go straight into the next arc, but that we really needed that episode to breathe, and that they recognized that and didn't stubbornly stick to the three episode structure.
And I think it does something really well, which is what Mandalorian doesn't do, which is expand and let you follow other characters. So it allows that breathing room. Because if that was Mandalorian, you'd be like, okay, we have to go to the next thing instantly because there's no other characters that can breathe.
Yeah.
Like if Bo-Katan isn't in Mandalorian's in Din Djarin's presence, you don't really get Bo-Katan then. Which is like why I love following the bad guys, following Dedra, following the less bad guy Cyril, or maybe good guy depending who you
It's
are.
just other characters. We followed other characters.
Yes,
we can talk about Dedra. We can talk about Mon Mothma
But
and
I
Luthen.
also really do love Luthen's storyline too. Living that double life is so cool, and to see how different he is, and also when I think it's the first episode with the building crumbling around them with Luthen and Andor when they meet is so cool.
Yeah.
Just that set design.
I love that set. I love that pressure and that feeling of like them trying to escape, which is great in a scene. It's like, whoa, where is this coming from? This is so early on.
Yeah.
And then Mon Mothma. I mean, we haven't even talked about the political intrigue, Max. That's your favorite part of the whole thing, and that's something that came out of nowhere.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to execution, right? Because, again, in theory, if you're like pitching this to somebody and being like, oh, and every now and then we'll keep going back to Mon Mothma, and she'll kind of talk about how she's struggling to fund a rebellion. You in your mind, you would be like, okay, that might be the part where I kind of start to check out, right? Yeah. But yeah, that was my favorite part. Every time Mon Mothma was on screen, it like kind of stole it for me a little bit, and like seeing her. I really like this idea of like this middle ground between good and bad, right? Like doing bad things for the right reasons. And Mon Mothma and Luthen in this show do it so well, where like they both have good intentions. They want to overthrow the Empire. They know that the Empire is evil, but they're also doing evil things to accomplish that.
Yeah.
For Luthen, I think it's very evident when he basically sacrifices Krieger and 30 men just so that he doesn't give away his mole on the inside. And he talks about how
Why is Luke laughing? I want to know so bad.
Sorry, I just thought it was funny because you got the numbers right, but they say so many times, they just phrase it so specifically, 30 men plus Krieger. You just said you had to sacrifice Krieger and 30 men. It just made me laugh.
30 men plus Krieger. But yeah, like just like showing like that side of it and being like, well, let's call it what it is. And then Saw Gerrera says, let's call it war.
Also great to hear Saw Gerrera's voice.
I know, I really
his
like
grumbly voice.
I really like Saw Gerrera. And then Mon Mothma, on the other hand, who's like knowing that her driver is a spy.
Yeah.
That was a great scene.
Yeah,
So she starts kind of throwing the trail by like accusing her own husband of gambling again and everything.
Yeah.
And like that scene is like, oh, Mon, you're kind of manipulative.
Yes.
And then like the whole scene where they basically like sell off their daughter to this other person who
Yeah.
she doesn't like just because he has money and might be able to. Yeah, like everything about it, you're like, Mon, you're kind of naughty.
What are you gonna do for the rebellion?
I also, on the political intrigue, and like I love exactly what you're talking about. These like cold, precise strikes and how they contrast with this like very emotional sledgehammer of the rebellion.
I like everything you're saying.
It's so interesting, and it's such a nice contrast to see. And I agree. Every time the scenes with the political intrigue came in, I kind of leaned in because you sort of sit back and watch all of these crazy sledgehammer strikes and how they don't pan out and how emotional everyone is around them.
Yeah.
And then you get these sort of quiet scenes, and it's a really nice lean in.
And now, Sway, you don't know because you haven't seen the prequel movies, but it's interesting because political intrigue was a large part of the prequels, and that was not done well, and it got a lot of grief, and a lot of people don't like those aspects.
Interesting.
That's why I was talking about trade disputes with not trade disputes.
What is trade disputes?
Yeah.
You did talk, yeah.
Trade disputes and taxations.
Yeah.
Mon Mothma is one of my favorite things about the show because she represents a lot of what I love about Star Wars, and that's like the lore and how it can keep building on itself for ever in theory, but for decades at least in practice, because Mon Mothma was originally in Return of the Jedi in 1983, leading the rebellion, and then they bring her back for Revenge of the Sith as a senator in the Republic, but they delete all of her scenes, so she's not really back. But then they bring her back for real in Rogue One in 2015, and they have her played by the same character that almost played her in 2005, Rogue One in 2016, and then 11 years earlier in 2005, all of her scenes were cut, but they brought back the same actress, and they didn't need to do that because there are a dozen actresses that probably could have done the job, but they kept the same one for the diehard fans like me that care about that, and I thought that was really amazing. And then narratively, it makes sense for her to be in this show. And we know so much about this character, just ancillary, really. We don't really know that much. We've just seen her a lot and heard of her a lot. But there's so much to explore with her character in this time period, not to mention all the things we know about her character from 10 years prior and 10 years in the future. Yet this is the 4th or 5th time we're experiencing her character, and it's the most interesting it's ever been.
Yeah.
That's really a fine line to walk, to keep bringing back the same character, but to do it better every time is amazing.
It's a perfect character to expand as well. It was like same thing with like it sounds like I'm complaining a lot about other things, but it's like that's how you should have done Boba Fett. It's like, well, it's really interesting. Like they really expanded Mon Mothma, who was just like, oh, kind of like a random character that now we're all like, yeah, Mon Mothma's like the best, and she's gonna be in Ahsoka too. And so it's like, man, I'm really excited for that. I want to see where she goes.
I know, because there's a lot of books and comics about her in the New Republic, and she's like the Chancellor of the New Republic for decades, I believe. And there's a lot of good stories with her.
Yeah.
When they relocate the New Republic to her home planet of Chandrilla before Hosnian Prime.
Kind of last thing that I have kind of in the positive. We can probably talk about, like, we can probably do 3 episodes on Andor, really, if we rewatched it properly as well.
Talking just about the positives of Andor.
Yeah.
Literally, I mean,
Yeah.
I would love to, I kind of want to rewatch now and see if there are any negatives watching it again. But something I really like is this, I think Star Wars and overall is just like about back alley deals.
Yeah.
And I think that it does it really well. It was the ultimate show of back alley deals. I mean, you have like the political intrigue aspect. You have Andor figuring out who he is in the rebellion. You have Luthen living the double life. You have Bix kind of on the outskirts understanding this, his friends and stuff too. We haven't even talked about, and we've alluded to in other episodes, but like the stuff that I really love. I forget the name of the guy who does the clock tower that you mentioned.
The Time Grappler.
The Time Grappler. Like that stuff is the best. I'm like, I want to see you live with that character for like literal minutes, which is kind of odd. But it's like, no, I want to know more about how that town operates. And that set is so cool. And it's like, you learn all of this stuff. You're familiar with all of it. And then you are able to ultimately get to the procession scene, and it's great because you are familiar with everything.
Yeah.
And we haven't even talked about, I guess, the other characters that are in the rebellion, and I'm forgetting their names now as well. That is Mon Mothma's sister,
Vel.
Yeah, and like that whole relationship and how she's leading things, and I think that's stellar too. I mean, everything is interconnected. And it's like when that was revealed, I was like, "Whoa!"
Yeah, that was a great
insane.
reveal.
Yeah.
That was fun.
And that's like, I think we talked about this in the Kenobi review, is that Kenobi relies a lot on reveals. It's like someone's with a hood, has a hood on, and they take it off, and you're like, "Oh, okay, it's Bail Organa. That makes sense."
Yeah.
But like Andor does them so well.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It plays it so straight. It's just like, that's her sister. Catch on.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa. And
I
you're just like
think-
whiplashed.
I think you point out something in Andor which we're all sort of circling, which is it's so unself-conscious of its audience.
Yeah.
And it's just like you hear new information that makes you think, what just happened?
Yeah.
But it's not being presented to you as an audience member. It's like you're just a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
Like, take it or don't.
Yeah. I think that's a
Yeah.
great way to put it.
Same with the pacing, and I think a lot of things we're circling. It's very unself-conscious of its audience.
Yes. Yes. Unlike, I always think of the line that Max mentioned in Mandalorian where it's like, yes, make it quick. I am busy. Like, and it's like, that is just like
there's a lot of
whoa.
moments like that in Mandalorian where you're just like, you're taken out of it instantly. You're like, that wasn't a natural thing to say.
Yeah, it was just like, we need to inform the audience. When in Andor, you're like,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like you are the audience. It just literally feels like you're watching something. Versus, I mean, it's such a weird fine line to make. But like
It doesn't feel like the actors are turned towards you
yes,
and like
this is a show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I don't know as much about filmmaking as you guys. I don't follow it, or I'm not as into it. I'm just a Star Wars fan more than the film or TV fan. But the way that they are able to structure the final episode, the finale of season 1, with, I don't know if it's the pacing or just the writing, but the way that they can have 3 unique scenes that have an inspiring monologue. Like, I saw a review talking about how the Narkina 5 episode, like what you said, a lesser version of the show would have had Cassian leading the outbreak, and it would have been great, and I would have loved it, but this is what I didn't know I wanted. And this is how I don't know how it happened that a lesser version of the show that I can picture in my mind would have just one of those monologues, like either Nemec's manifesto or
Yes.
Brasso saying Marva's final words or Marva's hologram, like that would be the crescendo of the episode instead of the procession. But the way this episode is able to craft all three together and have it keep building off of each other one at a time, it's just such an incredible feat to have done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
love
totally
it.
agree. And actually, I like pulled Nemec's manifesto, and then what was it called? Marva's. It's Marva, right?
Her hologram.
Yeah, she called it like. She had a specific word for it. I always wanted to speak, or she said something like that. It was what basically your hologram does when you die. But I agree. I pulled the manifesto and then realized it wasn't even what she said at her funeral, and that was a totally different. It just surprised me that
Yeah.
there were so many great, like, speeches, as you said, intersecting within that final episode.
I mean, that's like it feels like I would say the writing is great too, but it almost like when you're watching it, it feels like the characters are so well rounded
Yeah.
and so interesting that it just feels like very natural for them to be like, yes, this is like this insane speech or this insane like wisdom they're gonna drop. When we were talking about our favorite quote episode, Luke mentioned a couple from Andor, and he's like, no, they just like spit straight fire all the time.
They do.
Yeah, I mentioned one from Nemec, and Max asked if that was from his manifesto, and it wasn't. It was just the way he talks.
Yeah, it was great.
But people who talk like that are the type of people to write manifestos, though.
Yeah.
So it makes
That's
sense.
true. I do have one quote that I wanted to bring up from his manifesto because it speaks so much to the story of this show and not Star Wars as a whole, because there's Star Wars is so many different things and there's so many different types of Star Wars, and that's part of the reason I love it. But the line at the end of Nemec's manifesto in the finale when he says, "And remember this, try," that is the antithesis of basically the Jedi, who, it's a very famous quote, that when they say do or do not, there is no try. And it's just such a stark contrast because this isn't a Jedi story. This is a rebellion story, and the trying is more important than the confidence and being self-assured. Like, it takes effort to start a rebellion.
I've never
Yeah.
put that together, and I absolutely love that.
Yeah,
I'm
I
gonna
love
rewatch the
that.
show starting tonight.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, Nemec's manifesto is amazing. And the other quote I wanted to bring up is from when Brasso is telling Cassian her final words, and he says, when I was rewatching it, I started writing down the first quote, and then I crossed it out and put down the final thing he said, because Brasso says, "I love him more than anything he could ever do wrong." And that is such a poignant
Yeah.
beat on Cassian's character arc for where he went this season and where
Yes.
he will go, and like where we see him in Rogue One and what he does there. And the way that the show can just, we talked about this a little bit in the quotes episode, how I love when a single quote can tie together an entire character arc like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
It's just so fascinating.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I think that's all that I really had off the top of my head. Does anybody have anything else they're dying to say?
We haven't talked about Luthen Rail hardly at all.
Go for it.
I really like him. I just feel like we should talk about him. I mean,
I agree.
the way he leads the double life, which is really interesting. His
Yeah.
monologue obviously is incredible. We
His
talked about that in
hairpiece.
the
Yeah.
quotes episode. His hairpiece.
Does
Yep.
he wear a fake nose? Has anybody
just
noticed
so
that?
Skarsgård?
I didn't notice
Okay,
that.
looking at sometimes when he's got the wig on, I'm like, is that his real nose? Like, it looks a little different, and I don't think I've ever actually mentioned this to anybody before.
Are you talking about the actor or the character?
the actor for the character? So I guess the character.
But you don't think he's wearing like a fake show? You don't think he's wearing a fake nose in the show? You think Stellan Skarsgård's wearing?
Oh
a
no,
fake
no,
nose?
not Stellan Skarsgård. No, no,
Oh,
no.
okay.
I meant the character.
Okay.
Yeah, I was like, the actor is, but for the character. But no, yeah.
Okay.
I don't think he's wearing a fake nose. Mostly
I've never
just
noticed
because
I
think I would
Googled-
have noticed it, and we see him get put on his whole to-do in that one episode. You see
I
him
know.
like get dressed
you
and put
would
his rings
see it.
on.
You're right. You're right. Because
Yeah,
I
that-
googled
and that would be
Luthen
a
fake
pretty
nose
big-
once, and nothing came up, and I was like, am I insane?
That would be a pretty big punctuation point at the end
Yes.
of that sentence. That he
Just
put on a
wait-
fake nose.
Wait till the Andor season 2 trailer. The first shot is just him putting on a fake nose.
It's just a literal like Groucho Marx glasses
Yeah.
and nose mustache.
That's your season 2 theory.
There's my season 2 theory: is that Luthen is just Groucho Marx.
Luthen was in the trailer again. This show really kind of flew under the radar, like throughout like all of the promotion for it and everything. But I remember I wasn't really following it. I didn't think I knew that Stellan Skarsgård was even in it until I saw the trailer, and I saw Stellan Skarsgård. And I remember as soon as I saw him, I was like, that was the first kind of indication that I was like, oh, this show might be a little bit different, because the last thing that I had seen Stellan Skarsgård in before this was Chernobyl, which is also very good.
Yeah.
And like that was just very dark, gritty, great writing. And just knowing his character from that, I was like, oh, that's going to be weird seeing him go from that to Star Wars, but it's still just as good.
I would have loved if you were like, yeah, the last thing I saw him was Cat in the Hat. This is going to be a great show. He was not in Cat in the Hat, but it was really funny if he was. One more thing that I want to bring up is, how does anybody feel that B2 is going to turn into K2SO?
I have not heard that theory.
Do you like it? I'm gonna say you don't like it because Luke never likes the theories that I bring up.
I don't like it. Really. They're so different. I mean, they're complete opposites.
But do you think it's
K2SO
gonna grow?
is so confident. Yeah, I guess
That's the
could be an
thing.
arc. I don't know.
You'll see K2SO is I think the best droid in Rogue One.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's definitely the best droid in Rogue One.
Okay, sorry. He's the best droid. Period. He is in Rogue One.
That's more of a statement. I might agree with that too.
He's the best droid in Rogue One. Yeah, it's pretty obvious he's the best droid. That's
I
really
will
funny, Luke.
update you after I see Rogue One.
Please, yes. You will have to.
I'm so excited.
We should do a
Yeah.
follow up once you watch it, and we can do a Rogue One review. Obviously.
A Rogue One. Yeah.
Rogue One. Yeah, we do these these one-off episodes called Rogue Ones. That are just us talking about whatever we want to talk about. And so we have to do a Rogue One with you again.
I love it.
Anybody else have anything else to say about it? I mean, I'm sure we can kind of go on. Sway, do you have any final words on this episode?
Oh, I have a season 2 theory.
Oh yes, please. Luke's intrigue is piqued.
That they finished building the Death Star. Which is a joke between Matt and I, because he was like, you have to stay for the after credit scene. And then he was like, what did you think?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, it was some things building some kind of ship or something. And he was like, it's the Death Star. But I don't know any of the Star Wars stuff.
Just
so
no
I didn't know
idea
what
that's
the
what
Death
they're
Star was.
Wow, that is such a unique experience.
I
I know.
that's
I'm
what
biting my
saying.
tongue so hard. I'm like, wow.
So
there's
my
a lot I
season
could
2
tell you.
theory is that they finished building
They
it.
finished the Death Star.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would
Man,
like to.
that's really funny.
The last thing I wanted to talk about is also, I think it was in the finale. It might have been episode 11. When the Imperials are watching Cassian's friends and family on Ferrix, and they refer to Brasso as the big guy.
Mhm.
And I remember thinking, like, he's not that big. I mean, he's like a little bit bigger than Cassian, but like he's a human in a galaxy with like Dautans and basilisks.
That's true.
Like, why are you referring to this slightly average or slightly above average human as the big guy? And then the Imperial knocks over B2 Emo at the procession, and Brasso like donkey kicks him and then headbutts another stormtrooper, and I'm like, oh, he's the big guy.
Yeah.
I see.
Oh man, that's a great way to end the episode,
Yeah.
Luke. Great job. That's true though. I'm thinking about that now. Okay, well, we also do this thing where the podcast is called Force for Thought, and so we ask what Force for Thought, aka something that somebody can think about or we should think about. So, Luke, what's the Force for Thought for this episode?
All right, so it's going to be slight spoilers for 1 to 2 episodes of the theatrical release movies, but in Attack of the Clones, because I was watching it over the weekend, Anakin shows up back on Tatooine and confronts Watto, and Watto's like, oh, Anakin, oh, you're a Jedi. Do you think after that scene, Watto is looking back at that time he got hustled by some guy he kind of thought was a Jedi into losing everything he owned and Anakin, and then Anakin came back 10 years later as a Jedi, and now Watto just has an undying hatred for the Jedi for ruining his life?
I think Watto hates a lot of things.
He probably does, but I think Jedi's got to be chief among them.
Yeah.
He must be furious.
I don't remember that. He realizes that Anakin is a Jedi when he comes back and attack.
He sees the
makes the
saber,
comments
right?
like, oh, Jedi. I mean, I'm not going to do my Watto
No, do
impression
the
more than
Watto.
that,
I
but-
like the Watto impression too, but
Yeah, he calls him a Jedi.
I want to see a short of Watto that evening, just going home, his daily commute, getting home, making dinner, eating, doing chores, going to bed, and as he's lying in bed, his eyes just open. Oh my god!
he realizes it.
I just realized my Watto impression is a mix between Watto and Robert De Niro's character in Silver Linings Playbook. You remember that?
Andy, what are you doing?
I guess Watto is kind of just, Yeah, that's really funny.
Come on, Andy, sit and watch the game.
All right, great job, Luke. Okay, well that was this episode. Does Luke? Do you want to say where people can find you?
Yeah, you can find me at KitFistoBlog on Twitter.
You can find me on Twitter as well at MaxterJedi.
You can find me in Matt's basement for the next 2 days.
Yes, you can find us for Force for Thought across the socials and stuff too. Sway, thanks so much for doing this and being here as well. I'm gonna say that you flew across the country to do this
Yeah.
because it makes me feel better. But thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Awesome.
Yeah, I really liked having you on because you had great ideas and you seem like a very nice person, but I love that you talk slowly because it's such a nice break from me and Max and Matt talking so fast. Like, I could
Yeah.
feel my heart slowing down when you were talking. It
That's
was so
very
nice.
true.
A much needed presence.
We're always like,
Yeah.
we have
Yeah.
too much to say.
I
Like,
think it
that's
was
true.
better this was the second episode because it'll help us go to bed.
That's true. Yeah, we also yelled a lot the first episode, so we're like our I don't know. I feel like we're a little sleepy now, which is good. It's also kind of late, but thank you so much. We'll do it again when you come back for the Rogue One
Yes.
after you view it.
Yeah.
All right, thanks everybody. See you, Sammy.